Okay, right, technical issues resolved. So just a quick introduction to this building, so a picture of it, and gorgeous it is as well. And it is a very striking building. I'd say it's far and away the most elaborate in this run along the river. It's in an Italianate style, it's a bit like an Italian palazzo. This is a complete speculation on my part. I haven't had the opportunity to go and see it. This is actually recorded anywhere. But none of the sources that I looked at say who the architect was. But I'm just wondering if it might be Matthew Allison Hadfield, since he clearly favoured that style. He used it in the Royal Victoria Hotel and, of course, for Canada House. So it's another Hadfield building. So there's a bit of a family resemblance there, but I'm not going to claim any evidence whatever for that. It was just a thought, and his work would need to a bit further. Zooming in a bit. There we are. I took a few photos of the carvings, and some are, I think, just generic, possibly even out of the catalogue. So you've got 5 carvings of gods or other similar figures. There's actually two near identical pairs. The only ones that could possibly identify the item forms, if they're a god, they're probably can.
It's not easier to make the payroll reconciliation.
Can do.
But I don't think they necessarily signify anything. But I'm sure the other carvings are at one way or another. So you see, at either end, you have the crossed arrows, which come from here today on. The dolphins can symbolise lots of different things in heraldry. They can be kindness, they can be charity, they can be swiftness. They can even represent preparedness for war. And I'm not.
I'm not seeing them. I mean, I've got the guys.
I don't think that can.
Oh.
Oh, there we go.
That's it, yes.
Yeah, so there we are. Some, like I said, so fairly generic gods, and then down below you've got a guy with horns here. Yes, that's what pictures them say.
Yeah, thanks for
so yes, dolphins surrounding the description with these arrows on it. Again, I'm not sure the dolphins are anything jolly nice heraldic figures. However, the arm and the hammer and the pinion, they quite definitely represent industry. But either side of that, you've got these escutcheons with elephants. Now, if you see elephants in Sheffield, that's probably for the ivory, and the ivory is for handles. So you see an elephant surmounting a couple of arms as well, and it pops up in other places. So I think that's probably why elephants were chosen. And there you see the name of the manufacturer for whom the building was built in the first place, J. Shortwood, John Shortwood. Now, the hand is not his trademark, well, it's not so far as I can see, but clearly it has some sort of significance, perhaps honesty and openness. The one definite fact that it's buried is 1853, his construction. So Shortridge before this had been a railway contractor, and he already had some involvement in the area because he was involved in the construction of the Wicker Arches. Something about a decade earlier, I think, something like that. Architect of the Wicker Arches, of course, was John Power, and a Sheffield lad from Waddesdon. So Shortridge wasn't himself a Sheffield, he was born in Cumberland. He was married in Chipping, Lancashire, but he came to Sheffield and he lived at Chipping House, then the place where he married his wife, down in Abingdon. Not only had he been involved with the Wicker Arches, he was also involved in the construction of Red Myers Down. But sometime around about 1850, he went into partnership with Joseph Bennett Howell, one of a Jessup, James Jessup, although he's not one of the famous Jessups. He partnered with Howell, I imagine, because Howell had this thing called Howell's homogeneous metal. Howell's homogeneous metal was a form of steel that could be cast very smoothly, very reliably into large products. And that's actually one of the range of things that Sheffield has become very, very good at. So today, Forge Masters still specialise in enormous, very reliable, very high quality castings. And I think that legacy to some extent comes from this Howell's homogeneous metal. I think it was not so much the alloy in particular that was used, it was also the technique that they used for casting. So I brought up a view here from 1854, and I will. There we are. So here we are. That very, very tall chimney. That is the chimney that belongs to Howell, Shawbridge and Jessup. That's on this site. If you have excellent eyesight, behind the chimney, you can see a little building, but you really do have to have excellent eyesight to look at this. But to just the left and behind that chimney is the rear of a building, which I think is this one. I think that may be the first depiction of this particular building, which was rather the one immediately next to which was which was the officers' and Jessup. More prominent in the front is the castle. It looks like a castle. You can see the wicker arches in the background. You can see the ramp going up to Victoria Station, and indeed you can see Victoria Station as well. So here they are. They've got their 185-foot chimney, and then making this metal. Now, Howell had begun as a traveller, I think probably for Naylor Vickers and company, who I think are what became Forge Masters. And it was used in particular for things such as casting gun barrels. The Royal Armies particularly needed high quality gun barrels that weren't going to fracture when they were fired. So in 1855, they were able to cast something using the techniques they developed. And having tested by the Bullet Chancellor, who went on to take other things such as the enormous steel casting used with a cylinder and a hydraulic press. That was particularly impressive because that weighed nearly 2 tons. Bearing in mind that steel production at the time was essentially crucible based, so it's a pot of, would have been high, perhaps, and far less than that wide. So your steel comes out of those. Basically, the converter doesn't exist yet, so it's in small quantities. So to make this 2-ton casting required 93 crucibles of steel, each of 53 pounds. I think that's the metal plus the pot of that 3 pounds. And it had to be poured very, very rapidly. So it was poured in quick succession by 33 workmen in the space of 8 minutes. And part of the technique was instead of pouring it in the top, they developed a technique to be able to pour it into the sides and arrange for it to fill up and then percolate up. I can't see my gestures online, but I assure you they're very picturesque. And I think it was that which was intended to produce this homogeneity as much as anything else. So this is the first place to make steel ingots of such heavy weights. They made the materials of the first boiler that was made of steel rather than iron. But they also made something else rather interesting. They made components for this. This is the steam launch Mar Roberts. It was prefabricated and then assembled at the coast and taken out of Africa. The steam launch was built for one of Dr. Livingstone's expeditions, the one exploring the river Zambezi. So this is, again, an innovative product. It was dated from 1858, so still relatively early in the history of modern company. I have to say, it was not an amazing success. It was built obviously with a very shallow draft. It had to be hauled over the shore, which I think they can foresee. But I think what they've not foreseen is the power engine that they were going to need. So in the end, it ran aground permanently. It had to be abandoned. They got to put it on instead. But all pioneers that one must experience Livingstone himself is a very interesting character. In that although he's often referred to as a missionary, he's reputed only ever to have converted one person. And in fact, his vision for Africa was not one of converting the continent. His vision for Africa was one of opening up trade routes across the continent Analgesic Commission was meant to establish, and thereby legitimate trade could overtake an internal in slave trade. Now, the long-term effects of these may not have been so positive, because in a trade agreements that also global exploitation. So there's a dark side and a light side to everything, but certainly it's both began its life here on this very site. Yes.
I think that road somewhere in Africa still.
I don't know.
But they left it to Rockford. I'm just thinking it could still be there. Or something.
I somebody will know. I imagine if you've got a source of scrap metal going down wherever it is, somebody will
Well,
go.
that's why I just couldn't see it was there on the back.
You said that there. Here then is something else which was a novelty at the time. So this is the transverse of the first bridge in Prague, and it was made using the first steel chains used for a suspension bridge. Again, using the method which was developed and exploited here. This design actually was originally intended for the Albert Bridge in London, but there were difficulties over where the roads were going to go and where they were going to be allowed to place the abutments. So in the meantime, the designer reused his design for this bridge in Prague. Now, as to be said, the Albert Bridge was built of iron. It stood out 10 years before it developed structural problems. This one lasted until the war, and it experienced the war damage, had to be demolished. But it did rather better, so it says something for the benefits of steel over iron. Now, the partnership eventually dissolved. Jessica left the partnership fairly early on, but there seems to be some dispute, which I can't actually nail down, between Shortridge and Howell. Shortridge retired in any case. Howell went on to do other things, but Shortridge retired in 1868. But at that same time, another firm, Samuel Osborne, was looking for new premises. They'd already established themselves, I think founded 1850, 1851. They'd established themselves up on Brook Hill. Osborne wanted somewhere bigger, and so he came to what was their Hartland Works here, and brought the name of his works, Pine Works, with him. A couple of years later, he found a great opportunity to use this works for another invention, not a Sheffield invention, but an invention that could only be exploited in Sheffield. So this is by Robin Hughes, whose firm in the Forest of Dean had developed self-hardening tungsten tool steel. And it sounds a little bit almost dull described like that. But it's one of those moments in the development of steel when everything changes. It's like crucible steel, it's like stainless steel. It's when you finally have durable tools which can be hardened in the open air. You don't have to go through any special hardening process. And ultimately, the adoption of that product, invented elsewhere and exported to the hill here, allowed Sheffield to dominate the tools that make the tools, things that you need in order to make other things of steel, especially when you're really hard versions of steel, like manganese steel, developed by Atkins later on. So again, it's a crucial moment. Russia not able to do anything commercially with his own product, so he licensed it to Osborne. And they have to keep the process secret. They don't wish to leak out. It seems to give them a massive competitive advantage. So they even divide parts of the process between Sheffield and the Forest of Dean. So it's a bit like Henderson's relish almost, except more so, in that no two people are allowed to have the whole secret. Seems to be how they are very Oh, they feel Muscle tools, yes. There was a later firm set up under the same name. And I think Robin Hughes stepped up sometime in the 20th century. So, so that's Osborne's. Here's a picture of the works sometime in the late 19th century, and here you really can see the back of this building. There it is. That's the building next door there. There's that five-foot chimney still in place at this stage in the 20th century, and there's their name, Samuel Osborne, and so So later on, Osborne's were also pioneers in producing vanadium high-speed steel. So not only can you make a tool cut by a second, you can operate it 2 or 3 times as fast. Now, in the meantime, the Americans have found other ways of making tungsten steel even harder. So, in developing and exploiting vanadium steel, Osborne's and also March Brothers, another company, who also well, the same product, were able to displace the American tool trade again. Take it over. One of the big products that came out of this day was crystal drills, and this became very important during the subsequent wars. So, a Lancaster bomber has 500,000 drill holes, and therefore you get through a lot of drills. So therefore, you need some like Osborne's Sheffield that can make really, really durable drills from very large quantities, and when you're fighting war, it requires a lot of paper. So their twist drill output increased by something like 5 times, as did many of their products. So I think it's only fair to recognise some of the people who were there. So here's a small fragment of Osborne's workforce at the beginning of the war. There were about 1,700 people working, not at that time just here, for Osborne's as a whole. Only one person today, like that, so but that's works. So that's here, that's it. I want to just go back to this one, but I'd rather take this aerial photograph. This is 1937. So I think it's excellent aerial photo collection. And there we are, there's our building. And you can see the wings either side there. So we are in the one that we see to the right there. That's where this floor is. If you look to the rear of the historic building, those slightly up and a little bit further, those slightly bigger buildings there, those have been there since the 19th century, and they're still here today. And some of the footprints are still observed. I'm not sure whether the is still there, just like so yes, I'll go back a little bit in time. So here's Sheffield in the late 18th century and then late 19th century. If we look here, quite the building right in the centre in 2 different colours, from 2 different sheets. That's the historic building. So this type of building for universities. But behind you'll see some water, because underneath this site, maybe still, runs a mill right. So if you go back further, you'll find 1771. There's Ladies Bridge. See that represents broadest. You'll see there's a thing marked tilt, so it's feeding on a very short point, a tilt. But then you've got a long way here and there's the wicker wheel. And that was pretty much on this site, just behind the building we're at the moment. So that has actually been known. There's been a wheel on that site since at least 1581, maybe earlier, because generally the dates tend to be not the dates of origin, but the dates in which they're first recorded. It's always been Greenwich until part of the works of originally built, was eventually built on the site. And Goit still exists in the 1890s, so replaced by a rival in the 1870s. It's all there. You go up to Ladies Bridge, see it here, it's all there in that way. When Hartford Works was built by Shortridge Howard, so that was pretty much expunged, but I think we can still see the footprints being observed. It's not impossible that the wire that came out, which is still there. So there we are. That's coming forward a bit, going back a bit. That's as much as I can tell. Thank you very much.